And we're back, and we're actually talking with Gary Wockner. Gary, you're an authentic environmental activist. Like you would agree with that, yes?
Yeah, I'm the real deal. I'm such a rascal. You invited me on your show.
We invited you on the show, but I'm going to ask you to explain what makes a real environmental activist, because a lot of the people I know who claim to be environmental activists claim so because they recycle plastic bottles and use a reusable bag. But what's an environmental activist?
Well,
what do you do?
I'm involved in environmental politics, elections around environmental work. I run organizations that litigate. So, we're the real deal, and we enforce laws and try to actually make, positive change that protects the environment in a somewhat aggressive way.
Somewhat aggressive, yes. There is some aggressive tactics that are oftentimes used. The environmental movement has very much moved heavily into the courts and lawsuits, I've noticed over the years. All right, here's what happened. We've been having an email correspondence about corporate welfare and subsidizing growth through taxpayer incentives, I guess is the polite term for corporate welfare. But let's introduce this topic. So back in November, before the November elections, you opposed openly Proposition 110, as did the Independence Institute. And that was a 21% sales tax increase statewide for mystery transportation projects. God only knows what it was going to be. But you actually wrote and openly opposed it, and you opposed it for a very interesting reason. Explain your opposition to 110 and this tax increase.
Yeah, and I kind of stuck my neck out to do that, but in my opinion, Prop 10 was subsidizing and luring new growth and really rewarding bad behavior by state and local governments instead of making growth pay its own way and changing some laws and changing some policies so that we use things like impact fees and made growth pay its own way rather than raising a sales tax on everybody across the state.
Yeah, and we've talked about taxes, fees, and when we say, and maybe we should define our terms, because and I've actually seen polling that says that corporate welfare actually doesn't resonate well with people, that corporate favoritism actually resonates better. But I think Amazon is a great example of what we're trying to talk about here. And we saw the whole country go bananas over HQ2, putting together massive packages of some kind of taxpayer subsidy to try and lure this new headquarters to their state. We'll never know what Colorado fully offered because it's not transparent and we don't get to see the deal. But what they were really trying to do was to offer taxpayer incentives for a massive influx of people to come here as part of HQ2 to work for a company who could afford to move here on their own if they wanted to. Do you see a problem with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spoke out against the Amazon subsidy concept when Governor Hickenlooper first brought it up, and so that's been a long problem with Governor Hickenlooper, in our opinion. He's was a very much pro-growth governor, and the Amazon thing was just kind of the biggest of the bad ideas. Now, interestingly, as our now Governor Paulus was going through the election cycle, he was talking about trying to rein in corporate welfare. And so I haven't seen any specific policies or actions yet, but we'll see what he does if he tries to take some stronger stances on this than certainly Governor Hickenlooper did.
Although I notice he still does seem to have a love affair with subsidizing electric cars for one percenters. But beyond that, he hasn't spoken out on this broader idea of incentives for development. Right.
He hasn't yet on the development issue. Yeah. So, we're hoping that some of those things will start to come to the surface. One of the reasons like an environmental activist like me gets involved in these issues, because not only is it a bad fiscal policy, it also further wrecks the environment. Prop 10, for example, we thought would have subsidized and made it easier. You'd get more cars on the roads instead of trying to actually change the situation to get a mass transit or something like that. So you're further creating more pollution and further wrecking the environment with our money and luring new people to come here rather than making them, if there are going to come, make them pay their own way.
And just to be clear, you opposed 110. That doesn't mean that you were in favor of our measure, Prop 109. You were simply against the tax increase to do this, and I assume you opposed both. Because Prop 109 would have grown the roads as well.
Yeah, I actually opposed both of them publicly, but the piece I wrote was about Prop 110.
Right.
109, in my opinion, would have just taken the money somewhere else from state government, and we got major financial problems in the state anyway. I don't think that was the right choice, but we're not here necessarily to debate 109 versus 110. But
I just wanted to make it clear that you weren't
I came out
necessarily-
as an environmentalist opposing 110. Yeah.
So we, so Independence Institute, we're pro-growth, but we're also anti-favoritism. We don't want special sweetheart deals being given to one industry or one organization at the expense of everybody else. We think it disrupts the free market and it picks winners and losers. So we might have some slightly different reasons for not liking this stuff, but we've talked about this idea that in Colorado, we get to vote on new taxes. And one of the ways that politicians incentivize this subsidization of growth is through tax dollars. So at least we get a little bit of say. We get to tamp it down. We saw 2 big tax increases killed in this last election. But fees are a whole different animal because any legislative body anywhere in the state can enact fees with a simple majority. Fees are problematic as well, right?
Yeah, and this is one of the things that really slides under the radar and only real, kind of hardcore government watchdogs pay attention to. As one example, there was this huge furor around Prop 110, a statewide sales tax of a few $1 billion. And literally a week later, Denver Water Board passed a rate increase on most of the metropolitan area to raise a couple $100 million over the next 20 years. And so they did that with a simple majority vote of Denver Water Board. Denver Water Board is appointed by the mayor, and no one knew that it happened, and no one got to vote on it. And so this kind of thing goes on across the Front Range, especially of Colorado, for water rates and fees, for stormwater fees, and all sorts of things like that. Tax increment financing districts, and we just go into the statewide frenzies about sales taxes and property taxes when numbers that probably are 5 to 10 times higher pass through every year in the state of Colorado in terms of a fee or a rate increase, and hardly nobody knows it's happening.
There's this unwritten part of our Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that says that Tabor always loses at the Supreme Court. And what has happened over the years is the courts have been steadily expanding the definition of fees as they've carved out exceptions to Tabor. So it's only getting worse, this ability to enact fees in lieu of taxes. What did you see any? Let me kind of throw something out here. In this last election, Florida overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment that requires a supermajority for new fees at the state legislature. And we've always thought, why is it a simple majority? If people get to vote on taxes and if we have a supermajority for constitutional amendments, why isn't there something like that for new fees?
I think it's a great idea, and you see this at the local government especially. And people literally don't know, ratepayers don't know, and you're seeing, as you mentioned, sort of a kind of a mission creep in terms of what a fee does. Like, does it actually just provide an essential service for the people that are here already, and it's an increase that has to happen? Or are we taking like brand new farmland, putting in a bunch of stormwater and roads and sewers, et cetera, and calling that a fee, which basically is a huge subsidy for new development to come in and new growth to come in?
I think you just brought up something interesting, that you're talking about special districts there. I think that was the reference. And if anyone's interested in this, that Megan Schrader at the Denver Post just wrote an outstanding editorial on this idea on these districts that a lot of people don't even know they live in, but they're paying a really large property tax, and they're also paying stormwater fees, et cetera, and oftentimes not even really realizing what these things are or who's doing it.
Yeah, that happens up and down the Front Range. It's really kind of fascinating. It happens for special districts. It also happens for fees. I'll just give you one sort of example of, if you want to be outraged, there's a lot of options here to be outraged. But there's a big dam and reservoir project, and it's called the Windy Gap Firming Project. It would further drain the Colorado River and send the water over to the Front Range. The city of Longmont and 12 other towns are participants in this. So if you're in the city of Longmont, your water rates got raised by a simple vote of the city council to pay for it. Now, interestingly, Longmont's water use is actually going down, not up. But the city told everybody that their water use was going up, and so the city government raised their water rates. Also, fascinatingly, the Platte River Power Authority is also a participant in this water project because they use the water to cool the coal-fired power plant. Longmont also co-owns the Platte River Power Authority, and they raised their electric rates in Longmont to pay for the water project too. So if you're in Longmont, you got your water rates raised, you got your electric rates raised for water you don't need. And here's what's fascinating. The Platte River Power Authority just voted to phase out the coal-fired power plant and really doesn't need as much water anymore. So your water rates went up, your electric rates went up, you don't even need it, and it further wrecks the environment. So these are the kind of sort of outrages that exist all up and down the Front Range and the kind of things I get involved in.
We were just involved in this at the Public Utilities Commission, actually. We intervened in the Colorado Energy Plan where where XL Energy wants to retire some coal-fired plants and replace it with renewable energy. But the problem is they want to keep making the rate of return on these old coal-fired plants, and to do that, they got an okay to raise electricity rates, basically. And no one ever got to vote on this. So this is maybe a different animal, but it's along the lines of what you're talking about, that you do something over here, and the next thing you know, it's affecting something over here.
Yeah, and just the idea that so much taxes and fees, and really fees and rates, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And most of it is used to subsidize new growth and development. Some part of that current residents have to pay for. Other parts of it, they actually issue what's called revenue bonds so that future residents have to pay for. So this kind of thing goes on and on.
Oh man, Gary, we're out of time, but thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Check us out at independenceinstitute.org, and we'll see you next week.